demonstrated to them that once we get on their stern slipway, we can shut them down, they can't kill whales. So it was a waste of their time. They tried to outrun us. We chased them 4,000 miles along the Antarctic coast, all the way in, almost into the Atlantic through Drake's Passage below South America before they gave up. They took 172 whales, which is about 15% of their quota. But I felt when they left this time, there's a 75% chance that they wouldn't be returning next year. But now, because of the unfortunate earthquake and tsunami in Japan, economically they're in no position to return at all. So that's pretty much 100%. But we will be prepared to go down there at the end of the year if they return. In the meantime, within a few days of arriving back in Hobart in Tasmania, flew to Palau, and last week signed an agreement with the President of the Republic of Palau and the 16 tribal chieftains of that island, and now Sea Shepherd is the official anti-poaching unit for Palau Republic waters. So we'll be arriving in 2 months to go after the poachers that are taking everything they can out of those waters. This is the second such agreement that we've had. For the last 10 years, we've been in partnership with the Galapagos Park Rangers and the Galapagos Park, and also the Ecuadorian Federal Police, to intervene against illegal poaching operations in the Galapagos Marine Reserve. Our reasoning for getting involved 10 years ago was that if we can't save something as unique, as pristine, as incredibly beautiful as the Galapagos Islands, what are we going to save? And it's been a big effort. Over 300,000 sharks a year were being taken out of the marine reserve. Sea cucumber populations are being totally destroyed. Since we've been there, we've seized over 65 poaching vessels, 250,000 shark fins, and have put a lot of these poachers in jail. And so although we're perceived in many cases as being this radical eco-extremist bunch of pirates, we're actually in partnership and in alliances with the Ecuadorian Federal Police, the Republic of Palau, and next week we're meeting with the President of Tahiti in order to do a similar situation there. What we're trying to do is to construct a corridor right across the Pacific where we can provide volunteers and vessels in order to stop illegal fishing. More fish are being taken out of the ocean every year by illegal activities than by legal activities. And the problem is that our oceans are dying. 90% of the large fishes have already been removed. And what we're dealing with here is a thing that I call the economics of extinction. You would think that people would not want to drive a species to extinction, but there's plenty of money to be made from just doing so. And the bluefin tuna is a good example. My vessel, the Steve Irwin, and our other vessel, the Gojira, are heading over to the Mediterranean. They'll be there by April. And our campaign, which was started last year, is to intervene against tuna fish poachers. We get into the water, we slash the nets, we release the catch. Last year we released 800 bluefin tuna off the coast of Libya, which was interesting because we got into a pursuit from the Libyan Navy. But if they couldn't catch us, I don't know how they're going to do with this present revolution they have. But we were able to get away from them. And the tuna were able to be freed. Now, the bluefin tuna is about the best example of when I talk about the economics of extinction. One bluefin tuna, one fish is worth about, on average, $75,000. One fish, most expensive fish in the ocean. It's also one of the most incredible fish in the ocean. It's the cheetah of the sea. It's the fastest fish in the ocean, a warm-blooded fish. And unfortunately, the demand for its flesh has put a price tag on its head, which is accelerating that demand. Companies like Mitsubishi, for instance, have built large warehouses in Japan to pack as much bluefin into them as they can. They already have a 5-year supply. They're looking for a 10 to 15-year supply. Because the economics works like this. The more bluefin you can pack into the warehouses, the less there are in the ocean. And the less there are in the ocean, diminishment translates into higher prices for the ones that you have in the warehouse. Fewer scarcity means increased demand, means they're going to make more money, and the price rises. Wipe them out, and there's no more bluefin in the ocean, and the only bluefin left are the corpses in those warehouses. You're looking at $1 million fish, and billions of dollars worth of profits for Mitsubishi. And the problem is there's very few fishermen left in the world today. What we know as a fisherman doesn't exist really. It's all large corporate entities that have taken over for short-term investment and short-term gain. In other words, take everything we can get as fast as we can get it, and translate that into hard cash to invest in other sectors of the economy. Unfortunately, people don't realize just what they're dealing with. That a fish is more valuable swimming free in the ocean than it is on anybody's plate, because it maintains the integrity of the oceanic ecosystems. And we deal with fish like we don't give it any thought. Oh, they're just a fish. You know, a salmon takes 4 years to become sexually mature, and then it dies. But an orange roughy takes 45 years to become sexually mature and lives to 150 years old. Halibut can be lived to 150 years old. Cod can live to well over a century. These are long-living fish, and they cannot keep up with the incredible demands that we make on their populations, and that's why they're in decline and diminishment. And if the fish disappear, the oceans die. And if the oceans die, say goodbye to civilization and humanity. We die with it. We cannot live on this planet with a dead ocean. So ocean conservation and the protection of marine biodiversity is one of the most important things that can be addressed in our generation, because we cannot, for our future's sake, lose our oceans. And they're in trouble, seriously in trouble. And there are no safe places. You know, the Polynesians used to have a very good way of approach to conservation. The word taboo originally came from the Polynesian exercise of declaring an area taboo. For instance, if it was Hawaii, Anama Bay, the shaman would say, that area is taboo. We catch you fishing in there, we'll kill you. They're pretty strict on their fishing regulations. So this is taboo for the next 15 years. Better not catch anybody in there. And in that 15 years, the ecology of that system was able to repair itself. It was come back. And for hundreds and hundreds of years, the Polynesians were able to not wipe out their fisheries because of this very strict regimen. But the problem that we have today is there's no taboo areas. We've called on the entire Mediterranean to be a taboo area, the entire Gulf of Mexico, the parts of the North Atlantic, the Southern Oceans should be taboo. No fishing by anyone, for any reason, anywhere. And that's the only way we're going to protect our oceans. And the problem is that, for the most part, the oceans are out of sight and out of mind. We forget that this is the ocean planet. We call it the Earth because we're land-dwelling creatures, but it's really the ocean. And most of the surface of this planet is not protected, and there is no enforcement. We have all of the laws and regulations and treaties we need to protect the world's oceans. What we lack is enforcement. And because there's a lack of economic and political will on the part of governments to protect anything that they can't make any money off of. And outside of the 200-mile limit, it's like the Wild West. It's a free-for-all. You can do whatever you want. When I first started to approach this, I got involved. I was the youngest founding member of the Greenpeace Foundation back in 1969. And I had an experience in 1975 which really changed my life forever. I first got involved in protecting wildlife when I was 11 from releasing beavers from lake hole traps on the east coast of Canada. I was raised in a fishing village there. So it's sort of something I was naturally drawn to. But in 1975, we had come up with this idea to protect whales from the Russian whaling fleet. And we were reading a lot of Gandhi at the time, and we thought all we had to do was stick ourselves between the harpoons and the whales, and nobody's going to risk killing a human being in order to kill a whale. It all sounded very simple. And so in June of '75, Robert Hunter and I found ourselves in a small little rubber boat in front of a 150-foot steel harpoon vessel that was bearing down on us at full speed in very rough waters about 60 miles off the coast of Northern California. This was before the 200-mile limit. And in front of us, fleeing for their lives, were 8 magnificent sperm whales. And every time the Russian harpooner aimed the harpoon gun, I was able to maneuver in front of him and block the harpoon. And this worked for about 25 minutes until the captain on the Russian vessel came storming down the catwalk and screamed into the ear of the harpooner and looked at us, brought his finger across his throat like that and smiled, and that's when I realized Gandhi wasn't going to work that day. And a few moments later there was this horrendous explosion, and the harpoon flew over our head and slammed into the backside of one of the whales in front of us with the cable just missing us. And this whale screamed like a woman screaming. And it was very eerie. It never even occurred to me that a whale would scream. Screamed and rolled on her side in a fountain of blood, and suddenly the largest whale in that pod slammed the water with his tail and disappeared. The large male went to the defense of his pod, and he dove right under us, swam right under us, and threw himself out of the water, hurled himself straight towards the harpooner on the Soviet vessel to protect his pod. And they were waiting for him, and the harpooner had quickly loaded a second harpoon unattached, pulled the trigger, and at point-blank range shot the whale in the head. And that whale fell back in the water screaming and rolling in agony on the surface. And as he rolled in his own blood, I caught his eye. And he dove again, and this time I saw a trail of bloody bubbles coming real fast, straight towards us. And he came up and out of the water at an angle, so the next move was to fall right on top of us and crush us. And as his head rose out of the water, and I saw that eye come out of break the surface, and I looked into that eye, what I saw there changed my life forever, because I saw understanding. He understood what we were trying to do. And I could see the effort that he made as he pulled himself back and his muscles tensed, and he began to slide back into the sea, and I saw his eye disappear beneath the surface, and he died. Could have killed us, chose not to do so. So I very personally owe that whale my life. But as I sat there watching all of this carnage going around me, I was thinking, why? Why were the Russians killing these whales? They didn't eat whale meat. They processed the whales into oil. Spermaceti oil was the most valuable, and that was used for lubricating high temperature machinery. And one of the things that the Russians were producing with spermaceti oil was intercontinental ballistic missiles. And I said, here we are, destroying this incredibly intelligent, beautiful, socially complex creature for the purpose of making a weapon meant for the mass extermination of human beings. And that's when it occurred to me, we are insane. Ecologically, totally insane. And from that moment on, I said, I'm not doing this for people. I'm doing it for the whales, and for the creatures of the sea, and for this planet, but not for people. So, that of course, brings us under a lot of criticism, but I don't care. You can call me anything you want. I don't care. I don't do it for people. A few years later, in 1986, we sank half of Iceland's whaling fleet, sent 2 of their ships to the bottom, and destroyed their processing plant. It was considered a radical action at the time, but I had a former colleague from Greenpeace came up to me and he said, I just want to let you know that what you did in Iceland was despicable, reprehensible, criminal, and unforgivable. I said, so? He says, I think you should know what people in this movement think about you. I said, you know, John, I don't really care. We didn't sink those whaling ships for you, or for Greenpeace, or for anybody else on the planet, except for the whales. Now, you find me one whale that disagreed with what we did that day, and I promise we won't do it again. Until then, we will continue to do it. Now, the perception is that what Sea Shepherd does is illegal, and it isn't. We've never been convicted of a felony in our 34-year history. We've never injured anybody, and we've never sustained any serious injuries. Because we're dealing with criminals, and a lot of those criminals happen to be in alliances with governments. Iceland, for example, sank half their fleet. I sent letters, well, are you going to charge me or what? No answers. I had to get on a plane and fly to Reykjavik and demand to be arrested. Well, the chief immigration officer met me there with about 150 police officers. It was quite a reception, and the chief immigration officer said, well, how long do you intend to stay in Iceland? I don't know. 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 years. It's up to you. Well, we'll have to go to interrogation. Oh, sounds good. So we went to interrogation. Are you admitting to sinking these ships? I said, look, you know we sunk them. We're going to sink the other 2 at the first opportunity. The next day, they drove me to the airport, put me on a plane, and sent me home. And the Minister of Justice stood up in the House. He says, who the hell does he think he is? He comes into our country and demands to be arrested. Get him out of here. They knew that to put me on trial would be to put themselves on trial. They knew that. And that's the last thing that any of these governments that are supporting poachers want to go is to court. Because we have gone to court, we have been arrested, and we've won every single time. In 1993, I was charged with 3 counts of criminal mischief. Mischief is what they get you when they can't find anything real to get you. It doesn't sound very serious, but it's a felony in Canada. Mischief, endangering life. Life in prison is the penalty. Mystery, endangering property, 10 years. So I'm facing 2 times life, plus 10. Same time OJ's trial is going on. He's facing a year, 2 times life, or the death penalty. I don't think so. That. Anyway, what happened was that the trial lasted 4 weeks and cost the government $4 million. And my lawyer opened up the defense by saying, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're not going to say we didn't do what we're charged with. We're going to say we did exactly what we charged with. We're proud to have done it, and we're going to do it again. That was our opening defense, and we won the case. And the reason we won the case is my defense was the color of right. That I had the right to intervene because what was going on out there was illegal. And we operate in accordance with the United Nations World Charter for Nature. And the UN World Charter for Nature, which was ratified by the UN General Assembly in 1986, states that any non-government organization or individual is empowered to uphold international conservation law, and specifically in areas beyond the 200-mile limit. So that was the reason, that's how we operate. 2 years ago, I was giving a lecture to the FBI Academy at Quantico, which was interesting. They actually invited me and paid me to give a lecture. And it was a fun lecture, and you know, one of the special agents said, well, you know, sea shepherd's walking a pretty damn fine line when it comes to the law. And my answer to him is, who cares how fine it is as long as you don't cross the line. So we walked that fine line. And he said, well, you know, a lot of people who, because I've had 4,500 volunteers work on our ships, he says, some of the people, a few of the people who work with you have gone on to become, quote, eco-terrorists. Yeah, well, what's that got to do with me? He said, well, you trained them, you're responsible. I said, I've got 3 names for you. Lee Harvey Oswald, Timothy McVeigh, and Osama bin Laden. You trained them. It's interesting we have bottled water. You know, if this is 1965, and I were to even suggest to you that in 30, 40 years' time you'd be drinking water out of plastic bottles and paying more for it than the equivalent amount of gasoline, you look at me like I'm a complete idiot. Who in 1965 would buy water in a bottle and pay that kind of money for it? What that's called is adaptation to diminishment. As things become diminished, we adapt to it. We accept it. You know, back in 1970 or 1980, the eating of a turtle in Canada, a fish, was considered to be, well, that was a trash fish. You threw that fish away. I saw it for 24 euros a kilo in Paris in the fish market last year. In other words, fish that nobody could think of eating 20, 30 years ago is now is served in the highest, most expensive restaurants in Paris, London, or New York. And why? Again, it's adaptation to diminishment. We forget the way things are and we adapt to the way things will be or are becoming. And that is our tragedy, because right now we're living in a period called the Holocene. It's been defined by scientists as such, which, as Richard Leakey describes it, is the 6th major extinction event in the history of this planet. Which means that between 2000 and 2065, we will lose more species of plants and animals in that 65-year period of time than we've lost in the last 65.2 million years, ever since the last extinction event at that time, which was caused by a meteor or a comet, this one being caused by us, one species. I think the best way to really convey the situation we're in is to really look at what we are and where we are. We're on a spaceship. The Earth is a spaceship. It's traveling through space at an incredible speed. In fact, I think we're going right around our galaxy now. We're traveling at 150 miles a second, which is 500,000 miles an hour. So that's a pretty damn fast spaceship. We're on it. And like any spaceship, it has a life support system. And that life support system is our biosphere. And like any ship, it has to be maintained by a crew. And we have a crew. And those crew are rapidly being killed off by the passengers. We're passengers. Mammals, and particularly human beings, are passengers. We're here having a good time, entertaining ourselves. Well, the real Earthlings, the ones who are responsible for the very fact that we're alive, continue to try and run the ship. And those species which are more important than we are, people don't like to hear this, are bacteria, worms, and fish, plants, and trees. They maintain this planet for us, our life support system. If it wasn't for bacteria, we wouldn't even be here. Thank the blue-green algae, because the blue-green algae created the oxygen which we breathe, and it maintains it. It's the trees and the plants and the plankton maintain that. There's our life support system in the form of the air we breathe. The food that we eat all comes from photosynthesis, which was, again, developed by blue-green algae. And that. So the crew, the bacteria, through the fish and other animals like that, are essential for our survival. A few years ago, the Fox Network took me to task because I made a statement that I said worms are more important than people. Oh, they went completely crazy over that one. And they said, how dare you say that worms are more important than people? How can you say such a thing? My answer to that is quite simple. Worms are more important than people. Because worms don't need us. We need them. They can live on the planet without us. We can't live on the planet without them. They can live without, bees can live without us. We can't live without them. Fish can live without us. We can't live without them. They are more important than we are ecologically, and we destroy them at our own peril. And if we wipe out these species, as we are doing now, we're going to reach a point where we won't be able to survive. If I were to go into the engine room of my ship and I saw my engineers popping rivets out of the hull, and I say to them, what are you doing? They said, well, you know, we get back to port, we get a buck apiece for each of these things. Oh, really? Oh, well, gee, let me in on that. If I was an irresponsible captain, as are most irresponsible captains of nations these days, presidents and prime ministers, they want a piece of the action. You know, the problem is that all of our elected officials are all rivet poppers. And the fact is that we're going to pull one rivet too many out of the hull. The hull's going to collapse, and the ship's going to sink. It's not a healthy thing to do. But if you look at every species in the biosphere, there's a rivet in the hull of the biosphere, the rivet on the hull of the spaceship. And we're popping rivets like there's no end to them. We're going to push one too many or pull one too many, and the whole biosphere is going to collapse. And we will be the victims of our own negligence. And that is a difficult message to get across to people because we are conditioned to look at everything from an anthropocentric point of view. That is, the entire universe, the entire reality revolves around the human psyche. It's similar to Copernicus, who revolutionized everything by saying that the Earth revolved around the sun instead of the sun revolving around the Earth. The fact is that reality does not revolve around human beings. You know, we haven't been here that long, or really come late. If you take the entire history of the world and put it in 1 year, the dinosaurs appear about the middle of December. And we are here for the last 2 seconds. So the Earth was not created for us. We're just happen to be passengers on it. Or as Lynn Margulis calls it, we're actually the mammals are for the most part weeds. And that's what we do. We behave that way. We overpopulate, we overconsume, and we steal the carrying capacity from other species. And that's why we're in a major extinction event right now. For our populations to increase and our consumption rates to increase, we have to steal carrying capacity. And they have to disappear. They have to move on because there's no more room for them. There are 7 billion people on this planet right now and 10,000 chimpanzees. There are more Bengal tigers in the world than there are great white sharks. When people say, oh, we've got to control the seal populations in eastern Canada because they're eating all our fish. Totally ridiculous. That comes from scientists who work for governments, and I have a name for them, they're biostitutes. They come up with the results to justify the politics. Let's go back to 1537. Jacques Cartier is coming across from Europe, to explore the New World. And he describes the bounty on the eastern coast of Canada and the United States as being so incredible that you could throw a wicker basket in and pull it up brimming with large fish. There was no shortage of codfish in 1537, but there were 45 million seals on the east coast. Ringed seals, hood seals, harp seals, and the walrus, which are now extirpated on the eastern coast. Now the population's only a few million. We blame the seals, not our own greed. But the fact is that if you want more fish, you need more seals. You need more whales and you need more seabirds because there's a balance that has been maintained from that prey-predator relationship, because the biggest predator of cod were not seals. The biggest predator of cod were capelin and mackerel, the fish that the seals eat. So when you lower seal populations, you increase predatory fish populations, causing further reductions in your targeted species. But people don't want to hear that. They want to know that they can continue to eat fish, and so therefore we will come up with one justification after another in order to do that. I was raised in a fishing village and raised on seafood, and I will not eat it. I think it is the most irresponsible thing to do, is to eat fish. And you can't get away from it by even eating meat. This is why my ships are vegan, is because 40% of all the fish in the ocean is fed to livestock. The pig is now one of the largest aquatic predators on the planet. Pigs are eating more fish than all the world's sharks put together. Domestic house cats are eating more fish than all the world's seals put together. And we're feeding tuna to house cats. Now, it's hardly a natural prey to the house cat. If a tuna fish ever came in contact with a house cat, you'd eat the cat. So it's hardly a natural prey. And of course, the other thing is we're feeding more fish to chickens that are being consumed by albatross and puffins put together. Puffins are starving in the North Atlantic because the Danish fishing industry is pulling sand eels out of the sea in hundreds of thousands of tons in order to grind up into fish meal to feed the factory farm chickens in Denmark alone. And this kind of ridiculous approach to exploiting our planet is what is driving this planet into ecological poverty. And we're too busy fighting each other. We're too busy declaring war on each other. We're too busy declaring war on each other for silly little things like, well, you know, my God's a bigger God than your God, so, you know, we're going to whip your ass. You know, that's really what it comes down to. The fact is that we don't really understand the realities of the planet that we live on because of our values which are dictated to us by media primarily. For instance, you know, we are accused all the time of being violent, yet we've never hurt anybody. In fact, one of our biggest supporters is the Dalai Lama. And in 1985, I had a Tibetan monk came to me and he gave me a little statue. He said, I've been asked to give this to you to put up on your mass. I said, well, who's it from? He said, well, I just have been asked to give it to you. So we put it up there. It couldn't hurt. Put it up there. And in 1989, I had the opportunity and the pleasure to meet with the Dalai Lama, and I asked him about it, found out he had sent it to us. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, oh, that's the symbol for Hayagriva. And I said, well, what's that mean? And he says, oh, it's a compassionate aspect of Buddha's wrath. What's that mean? Well, you never want to hurt anybody, but sometimes when they cannot see enlightenment, scare the hell out of them until they do. So he understood that that was our approach. That's why my ships are black. And when people started calling us pirates, I said, okay, we'll be pirates. You want us to be pirates? We'll be pirates. And we adopted our own pirate flag. Kids like it anyway. But the reasoning being is back in the 17th century, it wasn't the British Navy that brought piracy in the Caribbean under control. Too much money was being made from piracy. British politicians, British military people were making a lot of money by just getting bribes, and the corruption was just rampant. Piracy was finally shut down in the Caribbean by one man, Henry Morgan, a pirate. If you want to stop pirates, you need pirates to do it, because when you really get right down to it, presidents and prime ministers are the biggest pirates of them all, and elected officials and everything, we sing that. But the fact is that we are, I believe,